You're listening to African Men Speak. 5 questions, real voices, honest perspectives. In this series, we listen to African men and women at home and in the diaspora sharing how they understand masculinity and how tradition and change are shaping their lives today. What does masculinity mean to you today?
Masculinity, I'd say at basic level, it just means, to me, it means being able to lead, take charge of a situation, provide, protect. So at a very basic level, I think I can describe it in those 3 words. And just to expound on them a bit, in terms of leading, I think probably comes from me and the way I grew up. I think I grew up in a family of females, so being the only male in a female-dominated household, I'm not too sure what it was, but I always felt like I needed to show some form of leadership, regardless of the position I was born, or like I was the second born in a family of 4 and a broader family of almost 11 kids. But because I primarily grew up in this family of 4 kids and with my mom as the only male, I felt that I needed to lead. And that has been something that I've grown up with, and I still consider that part of masculinity. So I spoke about leading and then providing and protecting. Now, moving forward into me at present, I'm a dad, I'm an elder brother, a friend, and I'm a husband. Now, a lot of those roles, the roles I've just spoken about right now, the common theme there, or the most prevalent theme there, is me being a family man. And because that for me defines a lot of my identity at the moment, masculinity in that sense means that because I've got people, I feel like I've got my child who depends on me and my wife who also depends on me to a certain extent. I feel like being masculine is being able to provide for them, not just financially, but be there for them emotionally, physically, spiritually. And the natural progression, other than after providing, is being able to be there to protect them and defend them from any harm that would potentially come their way.
Can you share a specific moment or experience that shaped your understanding of masculinity?
I'm in a marriage, and I believe, as with any other marriages, people go through ups and downs and certain situations that you go through with your partner or your wife. And out of those situations, you realize out of your mistakes, and going for counseling to kind of like help you guys work through some of those challenges that people go through in marriage, you realize where you've altered. And as you do a bit more research to understand yourself and understand your marriage and understand your wife, and in my situation, like understanding my wife, I don't speak of her, like understanding your wife, so like understanding my wife, understanding myself better, understanding our relationship better, I started to realize that there's certain things about myself that I subconsciously did, and looking at them from that point of view where I'm self-reflecting on myself and my behaviors and my beliefs and how I generally go about life, it made me realize that there's certain attitudes that I picked up somewhere along my life due to the people I've interacted with, due to the environment I grew up in, and some of the things I was exposed to when I was younger, that without deeply thinking about it, I never knew how much they shaped my view of masculinity until when we had gone for counseling and the certain things that came out of it. So out of that experience and out of going through counseling and all the realization that came out of that process, it's changed the way I look at masculinity in certain aspects. And it's also just made me more aware of the way I also need to show up as a man. It's made me more aware of certain things that I used to do and think that that was a definition of masculinity. So I'd say that situation between me and my wife that resulted in us going through counseling and the exposure we got out of that process and the learning that we went through, that we're still going through, has definitely changed my perception of masculinity and I believe it's also refined it to a certain extent.
How do you see the relationship between traditional and contemporary views of masculinity in your community?
So growing up overseas in Africa, a more conservative society, more than half my life. So that is what I grew up in, and my beliefs are anchored mainly on that. So in terms of masculinity from where I grew up and how I also see it playing out in that society that I grew up, basically in Africa, is masculinity. It just looks it's got different faces. There's people who, out of that traditional view, see masculinity as being the person of authority. There's still the leadership side of it. There's feelings of authority and everyone else is subservient to you. There's feelings of you can do whatever you want as a man or being masculine and no one can stop you or no one has the authority to stop you. And there's also a lot of, I'd say, competition. As a man, you have to be competitive. You need to be able to also suck it up. There's no room for showing any emotion. You don't share your downs. If you're going through shit, you keep that shit to yourself, and you need to be there when anyone and everyone needs you. There's no time to be weak, no time to slack. You should be the one that everyone can rely on. And like within all that I've said, there's things that are, and I'm not too sure whether the word is noble, but there's things that are good about it, but there's also things that really can lead you to distraction. Yeah. And that's kind of what I think and what I've also seen masculinity being expressed as in the traditional sense based off of just growing up in Africa. Now, come to contemporary views of masculinity, currently living overseas. So getting to see a different side of things. And also as someone who didn't grow up with a dad, because my dad died when I was a kid, then basically just growing up around females, I did feel to a certain extent that I wasn't masculine enough just because I grew up with sisters and there's a certain way in which they rub off on you as females and just being surrounded by females. Not to say that I'm not masculine myself. I know I'm masculine and there's just a softer, I think a good descriptor of that would potentially be almost like a gentle giant. So you're hard, but you can also be really soft. So that's kind of like the environment I grew up with. And now, moving to the society that I currently live in, I feel that with a lot of the interactions I've had, I feel that the space I grew up in as a male around females seems to kind of easily fit into the definition of masculinity in this society, where yes, you can be the strong person there, standing up for your family, being there for your family, but also still have that gentler side to you when it comes to how you relate with females, not necessarily having to be rough with them, showing that you can also being able to be vulnerable and show emotion to females in your life. Whereas in contrast to like the traditional view when I was back home, there wasn't really much show of affection I didn't really see much show of affection. I don't know if that's because of the environment I grew up in with my mom only but even come to think about it, even with some of my uncles who I'd stay with, there was never really any affection shown between some of the males and females I grew up with, or rather, let me say majority of them. And I think that's also kind of like what formed that notion in my head that men are supposed to be a certain way, like strong and not necessarily show emotion. Yeah. But in as much as I saw that, and that's kind of like what I'd say in general, what my environment was ish when it comes to male and females, I still had that other being able to be strong and gentle at the same time that I developed out of growing up with females. So I feel in the contemporary society, masculinity is still strong, but able to be vulnerable and gentle. And with the traditional sense of masculinity, yes, they both share the strength, but with just less or no vulnerability being able to be expressed. Yeah. So that's kind of like how I'm contrasting the two and what I feel is the same and what's different.
Based on your understanding of masculinity, what experiences, resources, or support do you think would most enrich the journey of African men today?
I'd say, just based on my experience and some of the things I've gone through, and this is mainly from the context of being in a relationship and wanting to show up as a man in the right way that will actually support your relationship. I'm still learning and continue to learn, but some of the areas where I've been I feel like I've been able to grow in terms of what I think is positive masculinity, is being able to be in tune with my own feelings. And this has just come out of some of the counseling sessions that I've had. And I think like one of an interesting thing that happened to me when I was at counseling, my wife and the counselor, and I never really realized this until when the counselor actually pointed it out to me. The counselor would ask me how I feel about something, but I'd never be able to put a word on the feeling. So what I'd actually say, so how do you feel about this? My responses would always be, I think, I know, like it's never a feeling. And even if I say I feel, I'd never really describe it with a feeling like it's painful, it's hurtful. Like I didn't have any words to describe my feelings. And when she brought that up to me, I was like, wow, yeah. I've actually lived all these years of my life without being able to describe or express what I'm genuinely feeling about things. So I think for males to really be in tune with being masculine, understanding what masculinity is, I think to a certain extent, I think a lot of them would benefit from being able to also be in tune with their feelings, because I feel like that's an area that a lot of males lack in. And when you block out those feelings of being genuinely in tune with your feelings and understanding how some of these things, how feelings affect how you react or how you view situations, how you handle yourself in different situations, then you don't really get to understand yourself and the potential you have based off of being able to truly understand how you feel and do things based on feeling as opposed to understanding of your feelings, as opposed to not really knowing or understanding the drivers of some of the behaviors we have. And so I think counseling is a resource that is pretty useful in terms of resources about masculinity. So there's a couple of psychologists I listen to occasionally, and just their perspectives on masculinity and how males show up and stuff. Famous one, Sadia Khan, the way she brings out certain things about males, I don't always agree with her because sometimes I think she's a bit too pro-male. Yeah, but she normally has some very interesting perspectives, which sometimes in introspect, I'm like, okay, yeah, she actually has a good point there. And the way she explains those points of hers, like they strike a chord with me, and I'm able to relate with some of the stuff she says. Then there's also Brené Brown. Yeah, she's also a psychologist, I think. Yeah, I think she's a psychologist as well. Same story. Mainly speaks about relationships, but I think there's a couple of podcasts I've listened to, and she's spoken about males and just what masculinity is all about. And then there's this other lady, Esther Perel. Yes, the famous Esther Perel. Yeah, she's also one I listen to quite a bit, and yeah, she's got some good insights. Yes, she's mainly a relationship expert, but she also speaks about masculinity and certain views and stuff about relationships that still touches on masculinity and how males show up in relationships, and just a certain understanding of how some of the things that make us who we are as males and some of the things that influence our views on stuff as males. Yeah, she's also an interesting resource into just understanding masculinity a bit better, yeah, and explaining some of the things we do and why we think the way we think.
What message about masculinity would you want to share with young African men today?
So I feel like at the moment, and I'll relate it in the context of my country where I grew up and what I see in the media, like masculinity is depicted as having lots of cash, having lots of women, being able to be the one who is spoken about by everyone, being flashy, being the one with all the women, money, cars, alcohol, drugs, and being the one who can command things around you. Well, I think there's a time and place probably for all of that, and to each their own. But I think I feel that sometimes that gets projected as what masculinity should be all about. And for people who maybe don't have very good or strong role models, it's easy for them to get caught up in stuff like that and believe that that's what masculinity is all about. And without the guidance and being constantly fed with this, it subconsciously makes them into people who believe that that's what masculinity is all about. And yeah, it's it's a bit sad when that happens and you see people believing that and starting to live that like it's the norm. So what I'd tell them is you don't have to do all that to feel like you're a man. Yeah. Being a man is not about money. It has nothing to do with your wealth. It has nothing to do with your physique. It has nothing to do with who you hang out with. It's understanding yourself and knowing yourself to the extent that you understand your drivers, you understand your feelings, you understand your motivations, and like you're deeply in touch with yourself. And it's only when you're deeply in touch with yourself that you're able to exercise control. And when you deeply understand yourself, you're able to actually lead your life. It's not life leading you. Yeah. It's not life leading you. You're actually able to lead your life. And that's what I'd have hoped for the younger me to understand. Fine, I grew up with a lot more females than males. Not to say that I'm fucked up, but I didn't turn out too bad, but I feel like it should have also been good to have someone there for me to guide me through some of these things, and probably would have helped me through some of the challenges I went through in my life and just given me a different perspective or view to things, and probably gotten me to this point that I'm at faster or using a different route than the route I took. Yeah. But I mean, who's to say that maybe who's to say that it wouldn't have turned out worse than I am at the moment. Not that I'm saying I'm bad, but would have said that things wouldn't have gone south if I actually had someone there guiding me. But mine's just to tell them that understand yourself. Yeah. Because when you understand yourself, you're able to lead yourself. And when you're able to lead yourself, you're then able to lead others. And for me, that's the main essence of being masculine. It all goes back to the three things I spoke about when I started off. And I think the first one I said was leadership, and it's circled back to that. And with leadership, providing and protecting, I feel like just come naturally into that. Because as a leader, you're not going to let the people you're leading get into situations, or you're going to guide them away from situations that would potentially harm them, cause them pain. So it's all about, in my view, understanding yourself and being able to lead yourself so that you can lead others. And that's what masculinity is for me.